next week with the Infrastructure Committee, discussing that, and about a little bit about insourcing, outsourcing, and whether there might be different models. So this is really that conversation. I'm delighted to welcome Bruce Walton and Dan Bonifant from Morrison Lowe. Bruce, Associate Director, and Dan's the Managing Director, to give us their independent view of the construction sector and other and delivery models. They've got a slide pack of about 17, 18 slides. Who do we have online? A few people. Okay, good. All right, we'll make sure if you see their hands up, folks, let me know. I'll try and spot them as well. Just on Q&A, Dan was suggesting we've got a bit of a run through at about slide 12. Then there's a natural sort of break to a new topic. So if we can hold Q&A till then, and then we'll have another one at the end. But burning questions, just put your hand up and we'll stop and we'll put those questions to the team. Siobhan, is there anything that you'd like to say? No? And Brad here is also to provide officer support to the team as well. But without any further ado, we'll let the guys take it away.
There we go. I think it's working. Yeah, tēnā koutou. If you could start the slide deck, please. Just finishing off the introductions. Yeah, I'm Dan from Morrison Lowe. My colleague Bruce. Got a bit of a double act here. Public sector infrastructure is what we do. Service delivery around that is a key part of what we do. And we do it all across the country for councils and for government. So this briefing is very much in the wheelhouse of our expertise. If you could jump to the next slide, please. I just wanted to give an explanation of what we're going to go through so you can understand what's coming up. It's quite important just to make sure it's part of the background and the context that we're all talking about the same things. So I want to make sure you understand what I mean by particular words when we're going through this topic, and also give the context of where Wellington City Council is at the moment. Then want to just talk about the different delivery models that are available. And then we're going to step you through the process we took to look at whether an in-source delivery model was suitable for Wellington City Council. And then we'll get through that. Brad is going to give you an example of an activity from within Wellington City Council. And then we'll also look at what else might be potentially able to solve an issue of delivering the LTP program. If you could jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is a follow-on from a briefing we were at with the council in November, and the subject there was construction sector constraints, of which there were many and varied, and all of those continue to this day, and we all see them in every walk of life, not just in the council trying to deliver, but on all the things that we see and need as well. So it's not confined to Wellington City, it's not confined to the region, it's not confined just to New Zealand. So looking at what you can do to be certain of project delivery and delivery of your LTP is exactly the right thing to do. I think it's important to, as a starting point, to look at the amount of your LTP that the council does already deliver. And over the last 4 years, you've averaged 80%, which is actually significantly better than most other councils. 80% of Capex, yeah. Throughout this presentation, we're talking about the capital delivery. So you're at 80%. Over the 2012-2018 period, over 50% of councils delivered less than 80%. And in 2020-2021, which is the last reported period, only 25% of councils delivered more than 80%. So you are not coming from a low base. You're coming from a reasonable delivery level, quite a good delivery level compared to others. So what we've looked at is whether it would be possible to improve the certainty of delivery by looking at other delivery models.
Dan, just a very quick question for Democracy Services. Is this being live streamed? It is. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've looked through your LTP at what the program is, what the work coming up is, what the nature of it is, when it's being delivered, because all of those are relevant to whether you could change a delivery model. And we've summarised this through into this review. I've also talked to other councils who deliver works through a mix of internal and external as well, to see what lessons could be learnt from there. Next slide, please. So throughout this briefing, we're going to talk about different delivery models, and by that I mean the delivery models that you can see in the slide here. Some of these suit different types of work. The nature of the work or the nature of the service tends to suit a different model of delivery. So on your left is what you have, what we would call the in-house, which can be delivered through your normal structures. You can then become slightly more corporatised and have a business unit. You're then able to create external entities with which you are all familiar, CCOs and CCTOs. They're both council-controlled organisations. Key difference there is that a CCTO is a profit-driven entity, whereas a CCO isn't. You're all well familiar with the model and the arm's length nature of it, so I'm not going to spend too much time going back over that. What's also relevant to point out here is that you already use a full range of these models. You know, some of your services are delivered in-house. Your parks and gardens, for example, with your Capex and your maintenance. You know, you use Wellington Water to deliver your 3 water services. You know, you contract out activities, you know, your roading service. So you already have a range of these models being used within council now. And as I said, different types of services suit different delivery models. Okay, next slide, please. So before we start to get into what type of work you do and what might suit that, I just wanted to make a point that changing from an external delivery model, which is largely what you do now, to an internal delivery model would be a significant change. You know, there is a number of factors that you would need to take into account, and that change is not going to be quick, and nor is it going to be simple. This is by no means trying to be comprehensive with all the things you need to think about, but some of them would be that you would need to bring in the resources to do it. And I know that sounds quite trite to say, but you would have to go out to the market and find all the people to deliver those services. You'd have to put in place a management structure to sit over the top. You're going to have to put in place some governance to control the delivery of a service that you don't currently do. You're going to have to find a location that those people can work out of. You're going to have to hire or buy or lease the plant that you would need to deliver those services. You'd need to get the funding in order to do those. And depending on the model you chose, you may have to go and consult with your community. So none of those factors in and of themselves tell you that it's a bad idea or it's not the right approach to bring services in-house, but they are all relevant to the consideration about whether you should do it. It's just, I think, important that everyone has in mind before we talk about it that it is not a simple change as saying we are going to start to deliver services in-house. These things will take time. Next slide, please.
Okay. Hi everyone. So what we did first of all was look at the long-term plan that you've got, so around $1.1 billion through the next 10 years from 2021, and we broke these down by category. So in terms of the category, we looked at scale, either combined projects or individual projects, complexity, how technically complex are the projects and where should the risk of delivery sit, repeatability, so do you need plant, skills, equipment regularly for the same sorts of projects, or is it more of a unique project environment, and then speciality, so may not necessarily be highly technical but is highly specialised and therefore, again, not particularly repeatable. So on the next slide, I'm going to take you through what those categories are, but essentially you can see, hopefully from the slide here, that your housing, cycleways, and then general building and facilities takes up most of the spend in the LTP over the next few years. Next slide, please. So we went through some groupings. Now, forgive me, I know there's a lot of words on here, but I think it's important if I just run you through these briefly. So housing, so again, professional services and physical works. You have a high dependence on an external market with a wide range of size and type of supplier. So that's in terms of scale, that's the largest scale portfolio that's in the long-term plan. Cycle.
Just going to say, is that just social housing that you're referring to?
I've actually got a slide on the housing itself coming up, if that's okay. So cycleways, well, the land transport tax applies here, and I'm going to take you through that on the next slide. So you can't do that in-house. Specialist seismic work, again, it's complex and high risk, and it's arguable whether you'd want to take that risk in-house. General building facility renewals, again, they're likely to be specialised and require specialised plant and materials and expertise. Urban development and community assets. So if the Land Transport Act doesn't apply, there is some work here that could be done in-house. Minor eroding works, again, LTA applies, so you can't self-deliver. Commercial building materials, again, similar to the other one, there's likely to be specialised and plant and expertise required. Quarrying, again, specialist, heavy civil quarrying operations. Waste, again, heavy civils. Minor technology, now, the LTA could apply here, depending on what it is, but this covers things like lighting, parking meters, traffic signals, and so on. Parks and gardens, which is already in-house, and then specialised civil, which I think for the LTP was actually the tiger enclosure at the zoo. So these are the sort of the areas we've broken the project portfolios down into.
Just one question from the mayor.
Bruce, just a quick clarification question. Is there a reason water is not in there? Or the three waters?
There is, yeah. We excluded all the waters because there's already a delivery model for that that's in place. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a mission. Yeah, no, it's because of because of Wellington Water's already set up. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so under the Land Transport Act, councils cannot self-deliver work that's funded or partially funded by Waka Kotahi. So unfortunately that rules out all the cycleway construction, the minor eroding works, and as I say, potentially the traffic signals and parking meters in the minor technology portfolio. So what we've done now is exclude those from the work that's available as an in-house option. Next slide, please. So the previous slide, in our view, is work that can't legally be done in-house. These projects or types of project we don't believe are suitable to do in-house because they're either involve a lot of subcontractors, the specialist work, high risk, unique types of projects, and you need a sort of a significant investment in materials, labour and plant to be able to do any of them, and whether or not you'd be able to reuse those assets afterwards is the issue. So again, landfill extension, it's going to be a one-off. Quarrying, again, probably a one-off. So these types of work we don't believe are suitable for in-house delivery. So I'll go to the next one, please. So that leaves us from the $1.1 billion LTP. What we believe is that 645 million of that, or thereabouts, should be delivered externally, which leaves a sort of in-house, in inverted commas, of 445 million. So, so we think that that's a correct breakdown of what can and can't be done on the face of it. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So that 445 million includes the housing portfolio. So that we've taken all of the housing that's in the long-term plan and included it in that. So that includes refurbishments, new build, maintenance. So 90% of that 445 million is down to housing. Council compete already with Kangaroo for the resource to develop those, to deliver the housing portfolios. It uses professional services and physical works, but the physical works depend on a very diverse external market, which with a wide range of suppliers, from sort of sole traders through to sort of main contractors. A lot of that work would need to be subcontracted out, so you'd effectively had it would be operating as a head contractor and then basically delivering all the work through subcontracts. And the Local Government Act requires specific processes around housing procurement, which do lend themselves to engaging with the market. So, housing's challenging. I think that there is a partnering model, which is probably the more effective approach because of the number of suppliers involved, and so therefore and also, in terms of broader outcomes, this is probably one area where there really is the opportunity to deliver broader outcomes in the region and bring those suppliers into the mix. Next slide, please. So as a result of that, we've gone from 445 million in-house and removed the housing portfolio, which takes it down to 32 million. And sorry, next slide, please. That was just to demonstrate that reduction. So the final sort of tally, 32 million for the professional services component of the Cycleway programme, the urban development and community assets portfolio, and parks and gardens that you already do in-house. So in our view, that if we're talking about what will benefit the delivery, the accurate delivery of the long-term plan, once you've been through these steps and you're left with $32 million, it's that amount and that type of work is not going to have a materially significant positive impact on the long-term plan by delivering in-house. So that's the slide 12. If there's any questions, we could answer them now, or I'll hand over to Brad.
Councillor Calvert.
First, just a little comment. When you talk about housing, could you just talk about public or social housing? Because, somebody, without hearing what you're saying, will come and look at that and think housing right across the spectrum. So it's really good if you could just make sure that any documentation going forward is clear about what type of housing. Sure. I don't understand where the minor works are. We see what our city works used to. I can't remember now. What were they called? Well, they're city works. They were city works. When they used to do, and I think some of them are now like in the roading team, and some of those people that there and still with council have a body of knowledge about how what is in under the pipes and even the topology and all of that. So I'm not really seeing how that's being addressed here, like a pothole being fixed. That's the stuff that I thought that we were talking about but I see it's been excluded. So I'm just trying to understand where that might be or how that's been excluded.
The minor roading works have been excluded on the basis that you cannot self-deliver those anymore. You can't use an in-house delivery model. It's half funded by NZTA, and they require you to use an external body.
Well, doesn't Christchurch have something? Have a company?
Christchurch has City Care, which is a Ccto, a contracting Ccto who works all across the country. So it is a contracting company owned by the council. So if you remember back to the chart that we showed earlier, that's further out. So Christchurch City Council owns a contracting company, and that can deliver those works.
Okay.
And we actually cover that in a couple of slides.
Okay.
Because there is a reasonably large amount of work here that could be delivered by a Ccto if you go down that path, but that's a different question.
Okay, thank you.
I know Councillor Condi online has got her hand up, so I'm guessing that's a question.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I was just interested in what happened to traffic management planning, because that was kind of my memory of where some of this work started. Does traffic management planning just fall under all of that minor works, transport works, and therefore is covered by this legislation that says we can't deliver it ourselves?
So both the traffic management and the CCTO question are covered in the next two slides.
Yay! And then my other question was just about waste collection, because that's another one that we've talked about and that I just haven't seen here yet. But I suppose it's,
We haven't covered maintenance contracts in this. This is about the LTP and capital works. So the waste that is in here is the landfill development
extension,
rather than the waste collection contract.
All right, thank you.
Any others? Cool. Yep. Carry on. Thanks.
So, councillors, what I've then done is I've taken traffic management as a case study. Because of the Land Transport Act, like Bruce and Dan have indicated, we can't necessarily in-house self-deliver that. So we would need to use CCTO if we wanted to self-deliver that in order to still be liable for the Waka Kotahi funding. So just a little bit of background, there's a bit of stuff to consider when we start to consider going into this. and that is the stuff that is outside of our control that we need to adhere to. So firstly, there's a bunch of legislation that we would need to keep in mind. So there's a code of practice for temporary traffic management, which is a national code that we would still need to oblige to. The Health and Safety at Work Act, the Land Transport Management Act, as well as the Land Transport Act itself. There are other considerations that we need to consider when we start to think about creating a CCTO to deliver transport projects. And so for traffic management, that involves certifications. You can't just have somebody, even the individual that controls the stop-go panel needs to be a traffic controller, means they need to be certified to control the stop-go panel. So it's not just like you can take somebody without any certifications. There would need to be some investment into certifying people at the different degrees at which they need to be certified to do the work that they need to do. The equipment that's involved, so this goes as far as road cones, but also the stuff like your plant, your trucks, your vehicles, your utes, whether you lease them or whether you purchase them as standalone plant. Accommodation, Dan's mentioned this, but premises. Where do we house this organization, and how much do we pay to lease that housing or even to purchase it? The labor itself, in a very constrained market, how do we attract people to come work for the council and to work for the CCTO if we set it up? And then software. So there's a bunch of things in order to draft up traffic management plans. For instance, you need software like RapidPlan, and you need to be trained on how to use that software, and we would need to license that software, and we would need to keep it licensed in order to continue to use it. Next slide, please. So we've done some numbers, some number crunching in terms of setting up a CCTO in the space and what it would look like. We've done it a bit bottom up, so we've started with everything that we would need to deliver it and what that would look like from a council investment perspective. We think that it's in order of $2 to $4 million in capital investment. That's around stuff like purchasing the road cones, the stop-go panels, the delineators, the barriers, and that sort of thing. Then the ongoing OPEX. The ongoing OPEX will be about $10 to $14 million a year. That would be spent on salaries for staff. It'll be spent on leasing accommodation. It'll be spent on licensing for the software and all those sorts of things. With that, the resourcing in the current labor market is difficult. What a lot of contractors are currently doing, primary contractors, is not subcontracting it out to the existing traffic management companies, but are developing their own programs to certify people and to create their own traffic management. So it becomes very difficult for us to enter into a market like that when the bulk of people are already signed up to such intensive programs with career pathways. And then with the CCTO, Dan alluded to it, but a CCTO is essentially a council-controlled organization, but is kept at arm's length. It is a profit-driven organization. That means that we do not necessarily have sole rights to use that organization. They would effectively be open into the market to engage with anybody who wanted their services. So we could create a CCTO that effectively starts servicing other city councils around the region and may not necessarily be available for our work. So that's just a bit of a case study with regards to traffic management and what it would look like with traffic management.
Can I just ask, Brad, I mean, in the private sector, you'd simply go out and buy one of these companies that have got the skills if they, obviously if they're available and so forth, but wouldn't that, rather than piecemeal picking up the bits and bobs that you'd need, you'd acquire the Downers Wellington branch or something like that?
You'd still need to factor in the ongoing OPEX cost associated with it. And there'd still be a CCTO that would be liable for anybody to use.
So just so I'm clear, and I should know this, but Wellington Water is not a CCTO because it's a not-for-profit, right? So that's
That's right, it's a CCO. Could you go to the next slide?
Could I just, before you go, Brad, I'm interested to know what, or if any discussions have been had with our other councils in the area about, I know that there is some coordinating around roading and those sorts of projects. Do you just want to maybe talk through so we understand what that looks like?
Yeah, so we do coordinate with the other councils. Specifically, the way we coordinate with the other councils is around sharing of knowledge and intellectual property. So, for instance, if something's worked in our council, we do share that with other councils, and we have this ongoing asset management sharing that happens between councils. With regards to our resources, it's only when we get to really difficult situations like the pandemic, for instance, and when we went through the Omicron spike, that we end up having some sort of agreement with other councils as to how we would potentially share our resources if we needed to. But on a daily basis, we don't necessarily share those resources, although a lot of the contractors that work for one council work for the other council as well.
Okay, thanks. Laurie, did you have a question?
Yes. If we did look at a Ccto and we took away the setup costs / ongoing OPEX, would council return a profit? Like, are there other benefits to doing it, including financial?
If you're going to set up a Ccto, then yes, you would drive it to make a profit because it's a business and you've invested in it and you've taken a risk. You're in the market. You are now an owner of a commercial enterprise. And that commercial enterprise, I'd go further than what Brad said. It wouldn't just be doing work for the rest of the region. It would actively have to find work to keep its people busy. It would be having to compete for contracts across the region or as far as you would let it go. And it would not be guaranteed to win every contract with Wellington City Council because it would be competing with all the other businesses that do this. And unless you bought Downer's operation and it came with a track record, you would be entering a market where you don't have a track record and you don't have the experience to deliver those works that the competing organisations do. So it's a very different question than trying to deliver your own work. You're now chosen to be the owner of a commercial enterprise.
Just with regards to the financials, the shortfall that we would need to be making is around $7 million a year. So with the ongoing OPEX costs between $10 to $14 million, currently we're paying for traffic management services in the order of $3 million. So at the very minimum, there's a shortfall of $7 million that we would need to be recouping off that company.
But with this model, would we possibly make 10%, 20%, just all things going well? Have we looked at it like that? Yeah.
It entirely depends on what your drive for it to make a profit would be. It would then make its margins off what your expectations are. But, I keep coming back to this point, but entering the market of being a commercial enterprise is a risky business. CCTOs were created all across New Zealand in the early 2000s as councils' roading works got turned into CCTOs, their engineering departments got turned into CCTOs, then they got sold to the GHDs or the Downers or Excel Corporation. Some of them were very successful, but some of them were very unsuccessful and cost the council ratepayers a lot of money. My advice is if you are wanting to concentrate on delivery of your program, that is a very different question than talking about the creation of a CCTO.
Yeah. One more question. Could a CCTO be a social enterprise?
CCTO could be, but if you're not driving it for a profit, then you wouldn't need to create a CCTO. You could just have a CCO.
Okay, thank you.
Diane, did you have a question?
Yeah, is the work for Let's Get Welly moving in this, or is that excluded too?
Also excluded.
Okay.
Yeah. So the 1 point, we excluded the work that was already being delivered under a separate arrangement.
Okay, all right. It would be just quite good to understand how that's made up. Yep, thank you.
Sarah?
Just because I'm trying to understand this a little bit more, we've got this Wellington water model. I know water's excluded, but would that be a CCTO?
No.
CCO?
It's a CCO, yep. And it's a management CCO.
Okay. So it doesn't have to strive to make a profit per se?
No.
And what about when it was capacity? What would it have been then? The same. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, Dan, you said it was a management CCO, so that means that it's got a lot of management and it contracts and outsources. Is that
No, I mean it doesn't own the assets.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Can I just ask, so these sort of rules seem to be a little bit different to the private sector, where my business unit at my former employer, which was a drilling one, did work for its company, but when it was surplus and spare, it would do work for other organisations. But always the company had first call on those services. Is that different in this kind of CCTO structure?
If you created one, you could set it up however you wanted. And if you wanted to always have first call on its resources, you could. But in doing so, you would inhibit it from doing its normal operations of business, because it would always have to have the capacity to answer whatever your desires were. So you're probably already requiring it to be reasonably inefficient.
Yeah.
And we have reviewed a number of the CCTOs, particularly the works operations ones up and down the country. And one of the metrics we always used to look at was how much work does it do for its own council. If it does too high a percentage of work, then why have you created it other than for the NZTA rules? Because there's costs. You've got external directors, you've got a CEO, you've got a separate organisation that runs its separate systems, its separate financial systems. There are costs from an external organisation, which if they are not being returned by making profit from somewhere else, all you're doing is layering in costs.
The profits do get returned back to council, though, presumably by way of dividend.
Yes.
Okay, Fleur, you've got your hand up.
Oh, hi there. Just a couple of questions. First of all, with the reference to co-funded projects with NZTA, can you tell me, I'm just not aware of the legal impediment. Can you tell me, is it in the Land Transport Act? What is it?
Yeah, that's correct. It's in the Land Transport Act. So I did have a note to bring the actual clauses to be able to read out if we needed to, but I can certainly furnish that through. But yeah, it's a requirement that councils can't self-deliver. So it's not the CCTO; it's the self-delivery that it prevents.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting hold of that section and just trying to understand it a bit better. My second question really is why a CCTO and not a CCO, and why it doesn't feel like the public good of the council's work has been factored in. So can you just unpick for me why you're suggesting a CCTO as opposed to a CCO, putting aside those kind of legal or regulatory hurdles?
Sure. You could have a CCO rather than a CCTO. There is no mandatory difference here. The difference is, for us, if you were to establish a arm's length organisation to deliver your roading works and the things that we've got up there that you would need to compete for to access the LTA money and the other works, then you've set up a contracting company. And if you've set up a contracting company and you are its only client, then you've put a whole lot of cost into that model. And if it's only because you're doing it for social good reasons, then you're probably missing the opportunity to ameliorate some of those costs by working for other customers. You're also missing the opportunity to build your capability and your capacity and your experience by delivering other projects. So it's simply that once you've set up that organisation, you're either going to set it up so that it has almost an oversupply of capacity, or you're going to use that extra capacity to go and do work elsewhere, because you've set it up big enough to do everything you need.
And I guess my next question was, why not the next step along, which is just internally insourced, properly run by the council? Because at the moment, other people are profiting off it. So I'm trying to understand why, if the people that we contract to can profit from the work that we give them, why there isn't a cost saving in us providing it for ourselves. And I can appreciate there are some of those things on the outliners, like you said, quarries and that sort of thing. But for core business that is always going to be part of running a city, I don't understand why that model, what your analysis is that means that model isn't better run in-house, or where we don't have a profit motive and we're driven by a public good. I'm just not grasping it. I don't see your logical leap.
Can we go back to slide 8, please? Oh, sorry, keep going up. Sorry, up. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess, we do believe that there is a lot of work that council is not best placed to do. And that's why we've tried to explain, or perhaps I can go through these again and explain in a little more detail.
No, sorry, I appreciate those.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is there is a whole, of course we're not well placed to do it because we're not doing it, but no one's well placed to do it until it builds the capacity to do it. And I guess putting aside those ones at the edges, I'm trying to understand why you're saying we have to jump to a profit motive driven organisation, which the council would itself be competing with, or putting in, the CCTO model, versus doing it ourselves in-house, like we do for parks and libraries.
Yeah, I think we might have got a bit off track by talking about the CCTO, but
I just don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand why you jump to a profit model. Like I want to know we're paying for a whole bunch of stuff. And look, I would just keep it simple. We're paying for a whole bunch of stuff. A whole lot of companies that we contract to are making money off us paying for it. Therefore, there's got to be a sweet spot, and it might not be, I accept it might not be straight away, but there's got to be a move or a kind of a time when it's better for us to be doing that stuff as opposed to giving profit to others. And I understand your analysis on these, and it's good because it shows that you've taken it seriously, but it doesn't feel to me like you've looked for where's the benefit. And sure, there might be some initial startup costs. Of course, we're not ready to do it tomorrow, but we do it in parks and we do it well. Why can't we do it in other areas?
Yeah, so I think the answer from our perspective is when you add up the things that you are not allowed to do in-house and the things that are on this slide that we don't think that you should do, then the most that you're left with is 390 million out of the 1.1 billion in the LTP. And when you look at that, 90% of that is housing. And of that housing, it is not just basic stuff. It is made up of multiple different trades, all doing different activities within the housing. So unless you're going to become a building company capable of doing all the types of work, then what is left is actually $32 million worth of work. But I guess I wanted this workshop to say maybe we should become a building company. Here's what that would do, or specialist seismic work. I would say that's got a pretty long. There's going to be a lot of work on that in Wellington for a long time. I can understand quarrying maybe, but I guess what I was hoping for is an options as opposed to barriers.
Yes, we are going to talk about options actually later on, but in terms of the, so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, it's less of the, it's the CCO versus CCTO issue, so one that makes profit and one that doesn't, versus somebody else making profit and delivering the same work. But one of the things that we looked at was the timing of your LTP. So there's not a bow wave, but certainly the bulk of the spend comes in the first 2 to 3 years. So if you haven't actually managed to incorporate anything by the end of that period, then there's no work for them to do that's of any value anyway. And putting back your program to suit what might be like a council objective, I'm not sure whether that's. I mean, I don't know whether that's suitable or not, but yeah. So if it's profit versus non-profit, then I think the issue is for us the same. It's just the practicality of actually doing it.
Thanks, Councillor Fitzsimons. I'm going to guess that you're going to come back to us actually later in this presentation. Sarah, did you have another question?
Mine was just hopefully very quick. It's that we're not allowed to do work when Waka Kotahi's funding it, but we are allowed to do the design work. So is that excluded in the Act?
That's correct, yeah. You can do
Okay.
professional services. Yeah.
Okay,
do come
so we
onto
can
that.
do this
Yeah.
professional services, but not the actual delivery on the ground. Okay.
Mayor Foster.
My first question was, have you finished the slides? So I got down to, I think you had one or two left. You've got one or two left, please finish them.
We do have one or two left, but
Excellent.
we've probably covered a fair bit of that, and I could race through them quite quickly.
If you could do that, because
there's an
then I know
important
which
one at the
questions
end.
I've got to ask.
Yeah.
If you'd like to finish up the slides and then...
Keep me on, I'll ask the questions.
Yeah, I've got a few questions along the same as Councillor Fitzsimons, actually.
Okay. Here we were saying, well, just because we've said you can't do it in-house, is there a possibility to do it another way? So we're not trying to drive you towards a profit-driven motive. We're saying, is there a different way to deliver it that would make sense for you? And as Bruce has just pointed out, there is this peak of work, and particularly around cycleways and minor roading works, which peak in 22, 23, around those years. And you are not going to be able to get yourself organised into a CCTO in order to deliver that peak of work in the current time frame. So the body of work that is in the LTP that might be suitable for delivery under this model that would satisfy NZTA would not be able to be delivered in the time frame you've currently got. So that's what this slide says there. Next slide, please. And we've covered quite a lot of this in the discussion already, that actually it's a very different question about turning into a profit-driven entity to deliver work. It's different to looking at trying to deliver your own work. You are also going to be in the business of competing with the same suppliers that you are wanting to use on other contracts. You are going to be competing with the small contractors on whom livelihood currently is made through contracts with council. You are going to be experiencing exactly the same constraints that all the other parts of the construction sector are facing. Change of delivery model in and of itself is not going to change the challenges for finding resources or the challenges with finding materials. It will not immediately change those. There are costs that would be incurred, but as we've talked about, there is an opportunity for some of those costs to be delivered back to council through a profit, through the work it would do. What we have seen, if you could go to the next slide, through looking at your LTP, through the work we do with other councils and discussions with the councils who still do have in-house delivery units, and the type of work they do is Three Waters operations and maintenance, it's basic building maintenance, it's activities like that, it's parks and reserves. That's the level of work that is currently delivered in-house by other councils across New Zealand. What we are seeing, though, across New Zealand is a reaction to the outsourcing of everything, or the creation of CCTOs, and that's development of different models of contracting, more alliancing, more partnership, open book type contracts, where councils are trying to bring back a level of control and trying to manage the cost that is being built into the system. You know, we, as part of this, we've looked at other projects we've been doing around New Zealand that have relevance. We were asked to review some panels set up for large city councils, and we're able to directly compare two of them. And in one of the panels, the arrangement was that all contractors on the panel would get an amount of work, and then there'd be an amount of work that was competitive depending on performance. That kind of arrangement allowed those contractors to bring workers into the region, to set up the supply chain, to set up the structure to deliver the work. Another panel for another large city council with a very large program did not have the same certainty. There's still procurement processes built into it so that there wasn't the opportunity for the organisations to be as committed. They were uncertain about bringing resources in. They were therefore unlikely to commit. And the uncertainty of that approach meant that the outcome they were looking for just didn't happen. You know, we work with some government departments, and their approach to it is to look at multi-year, multi-party contracts that involve all parts of it. So we've got one with the Ministry of Education that includes the supply chain. It includes the freight and logistics that delivers the supply chain to the schools. And it includes the project managers, and it includes the people on the tools. So rather than doing it themselves, they've looked at what is the part of this process that causes the biggest constraint on delivery. And it is the planning and programming part of it. That's where the focus should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Councillor Freeze mentioned, the risky parts of the programme that you have that cause the delays are around the business cases, resource consenting, cultural impact assessments, prioritisation, land acquisition, procurement, all these things that are essentially a professional services piece of work. That I know Council's already identified the planning as a strategic risk that's being dealt with at the moment, but those for me are where you'll relatively minor value in terms of the overall programme, but where you're going to get the best impact in terms of a accurately predictable, deliverable long-term programme.
So we're open to questions, comments, discussion.
I think Councillor Dave, you got your hand up.
I have. So thanks for that. I'm interested, just going back to the slide that had the risks and the reason that we wouldn't be advised to go into those areas. And there are a couple of those areas that I think it was a tiger enclosure one that I was just curious as to why we wouldn't be advised to do that. Is that because we've had projects where actually the risk has made it harder for council to deliver. And I think of things like the town hall, where many organisations aren't wanting to go there. And so actually we can end up paying a lot more for that than we could if we actually were get up and capable of delivering that ourselves. So I'm curious as to a couple of those, why we wouldn't be advised to be involved in commercial building renewals or building renewals in general. I can kind of get things like landfill maybe and seismic work, but even not really then. I still think, like we're sort of giving up a culture that we're more sort of willing to pass the risk on, rather than seeing that as being something that we could actually be able to deliver in a specialist way.
Yeah. So I think council already does deliver all these projects, but at a management level, a project management level, but if you take any of those, whether it's commercial buildings, seismic stuff, waste, quarrying, you're going to need expensive and substantial amounts of plant, equipment, people to be able to do those projects. And then if the same type of project doesn't come along, within the next sort of project cycle, then you've got to invest it into a lot of stuff that you no longer need. And again, if that's able to be marketed elsewhere, then great. But if it's owned by the council, then you've made a big investment into something that's not really going to give you a return. Particularly, the seismic one is a good one. For me, that only certain contractors or consultants will take that kind of work on, and they, going forward, particularly with Envy now being involved in certification of engineers, they're going to, make sure that those type of people are actually accredited to be able to do that. So the number of those people that's available to you is going to be small, and they will all be working for organisations outside of the council. So I think it's really that if you had the right materials and plant and people, yes, you could deliver them. But again, it's better to give those delivery risks to somebody else, so the council doesn't own them. And also, as I say, it's the repeatability of that type of work.
Just to give an example of what Bruce is referring to here is, for instance, in our space, in the transport space, there's seismic strengthening work that we're doing this year where we're using predominantly crews that we wouldn't use any other year. These are specialist abseilers, specialist anchoring and rock pile crews with plant and equipment that we never ever use. So investing into that sort of skill set and that sort of plant might mean that it sits around for a while before you need to use it again.
Thank you. I just have one more question. I was just curious as to how it was that, like, works departments, there was the public works department and there was also within councils, managed to deliver quite a lot. In the history of our country, some of the biggest sort of developmental times were delivered by departments that were fully responsible for that. And I guess in the situation of being in a housing crisis and all those other sorts of challenges we're facing around needing, significant uplift in our transport delivery and that sort of thing, does it not feel like the time that you could actually be building something to be able to deliver faster? And how did they manage to do it, but we can't now?
I mean, it's a good question. There is a very different legislative framework now than there was then, which does kind of prohibit you from doing some aspects of this. You also have the fact that at that point, all of the skills and resources were held in-house. There was a public works department. Councils had all of these skills in-house, but you don't anymore. So you are having to rebuild it from the start. And the difference between starting from nothing and having something is significant. There are significant risks for your council from doing that. And I guess we have done a very high-level cut through your LTP here and said, well, this is the sort of work we don't believe that you should do because of the risks of it, because it's a one-off, as we've said, or the nature of it is beyond the capability of what you could bring in-house. You talked about projects where they are very expensive because of the risks of them. They're very expensive because of the risks of them, and that's the reason. And you would be taking all of that risk on yourself if you chose to do those works in-house on your council and your ratepayers.
The only response to that is we kind of are taking on that risk with some projects because the businesses won't take that risk on. So maybe some of that isn't quite the same, depending on the project, though.
All good, Jill. Diane.
I know I can sort of appreciate you've got a bit of a hard time at this table, but I just wonder how the scope of the work, because I think you've come and explained to us your findings. I'm really interested to understand is what you were briefed. Is this this is a presentation? Is there a report that you've written in detail?
No, the presentation is the report back. We were asked to look at whether an in-house delivery model would work for Wellington City Council. Right. Following on from the workshop we had where it was raised as a question. And so we have kind of stepped through that. We could have spent years and gone to enormous detail on this, but the approach was to bring you back a briefing to say, we've looked through your LTP and this is the amount of work we believe you could do. We didn't know what the answer would be.
Yeah. I just sort of wonder whether we've actually positioned the questions in the right space to start with. I know you've, and I can understand why you've taken this, but there's some broader aspects to this. So I wonder whether might have helped in terms of figuring next steps out. So so that's really...
Maybe perhaps say a few words.
Yeah, so this was in direct response to a couple of questions, one asked around insourcing traffic management and the other was after the presentation that Dan and Bruce gave us on the construction sector constraints, specifically whether insourcing would help us deliver the LTP. So that's what this was in response to.
I'm just saying the present, just sort of, we've just come in cold almost, so, but thank you.
Right, we've got about 5 minutes. So, Andy and Fleur, you've finished your slides? Yep.
Okay. I was holding off questions until then. So the first one is just wanted to ask about the list of projects which have specialist skills, and one of them you had is building renewals there, and it really seemed like the key bit there was you don't want to be in things which are not repeatable or regularly repeatable. We don't build landfills every day, but we could do building every day for relatively basic buildings as opposed to really technical specialist buildings. Is that fair to say that?
Yeah, I think I can't remember the program in detail, but certainly building renewals is something that's going to come around more regularly than the landfill thing. But it's more with those. It's more you're going to have a large supply chain involved with a number of specialist skills. So it's more the speciality, the specialisms that will be needed rather than the volume and ongoing.
Yep. Okay. And then in the three water space, why you excluded that, obviously, there's a lot of repeat business there. There'll be some more specialist bits and some which will be more basic bits. Again, that's in the same category, isn't it? Because you're digging pipes up and installing pipes all the time.
Around New Zealand, it's more the treatment plants that are still in the hands of council operations. The networks tend to have gone out to contract, but the operations and maintenance of treatment plants is still done by some councils.
So because the networks are repeatable business, why have they gone out to contract? And that's the general approach.
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I think.
Well, I think if you consider the life of network assets, water network assets, they're very long-lived. So actually, you fall into danger of creating your plans around your resource to make sure your resource is fully employed. So if we're driving to actually create more robust asset management plans based on risk and service level, you don't want to be constrained by the fact that you've got resource sitting around idle that you don't want, then you want them to do stuff, so let's get them to renew the pipe 10 years earlier than it would need to be, for instance.
You don't want to be doing that. So what's Christchurch's, how's that going? Civic? Christchurch's contract.
City Care?
Oh, the City Care.
Yep.
Their financial information is reasonably public. I couldn't tell you how they're going, but they should be busy. All contractors are.
So, I mean, is that a model which you could think about as being something that could have some validity?
Yes, but as I've said, that's a very different question than delivering your own work. That is about.
No, I completely agree. Completely agree with that. Yes, it is, and it's one you may or may not want to be part of.
And right? City Care has built up their workload over decades and decades.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. Right, and just other questions. What the ability to segregate? So in the transport space. What you said basically is it's got to be tended, so we knew that because that's what drove us to this in the first place. So would there be the ability to segregate some bits of the delivery of the transport? That's probably a Brad question as much as anybody else, because this started off from going, crikey, we seem to hire an awful lot of traffic cones and traffic management. Could you actually go, we want to segregate that bit, or with the likes of Downers or Fultons go, well, actually, we don't want you to do that. That's a pain in the neck for us because we're doing the road, and then you're going to come along and do the other bits which hang off the edges of it for traffic management reasons. How does that work?
I'll answer that two ways. One is, yes, you can segregate parts of it. The stuff that you can segregate out is the professional services, so the design work and that sort of thing. With traffic management, where it becomes really complicated is the health and safety implications, because you're effectively designing the safety of a site that you're not actually working in. So when something does go wrong, you've got a contractor that's working in the site and you've provided the safety for that contractor or the members of the public. Whereas in the current model, they have ownership over the safety that they've provided for that site. And it puts us under tremendous risk from a Health and Safety at Work Act about creating that additional layer with a contractor.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And then all of this, the last area of questions is, all of this is about the Capex program. In the OPEX area, we do tend, because OPEX is of its by its nature is repeated rather than Capex, which tends to be a bit less repeated. So we do a lot of our OPEX is done in-house, or most of our OPEX is done in-house, isn't it? Which OPEX out-house, which bits will be contracted?
Your parks and gardens is done internally.
Clearly that's done internally, yes.
Your waters is done through Wellington Water.
And that is both OPEX and CAPEX there? Yep. And roading, there'll be both OPEX and CAPEX, although we treat most of it as CAPEX, don't we?
Mostly CAPEX, but our OPEX and CAPEX is both outsourced through to contractors because they both fall under the same Land Transport Management Act legislation. So we do claim subsidy on OPEX expenditure as well, and so it falls under the same sort of legislation. We've never explored a CCTO for that.
So there are any other areas of OPEX significant OPEX that aren't related to CAPEX that we
Mia, can I just say, we have a significant amount of OPEX delivered through our other CCOs.
Yes, I'm aware of that,
and also our waste collection.
That's out. That's OPEX, which is out, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, no, it's good. It's good reminders. Thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
Councillor Fitzsimons.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's probably one more, which would be property maintenance, because we've got a massive contract that does property maintenance across a lot of our properties that is essentially OPEX.
Last question, Fleur, and then we're done.
Thanks. And it probably really is a question for officers. I'm just trying to understand a wee bit like Diane, how we kind of came to here. Are you thinking that this workshop fulfills the amendment that I moved, I think, late last year around looking at insourcing of traffic management and other options? And if so, has there actually been any work done on kind of what are the first 1 or 2 steps you'd do if you were going to look at this? So obviously there's a lot of work done on the extreme of if you set it up and did it all straight away, but has there been any work on if you were to go about this, here's the kind of steps that you would take? So 2 questions here really. Is this the response to the amendment? And secondly, is there other work or is there some kind of consideration given of the steps that you would take? Because, I wasn't suggesting that we could wave a magic wand and have it happen immediately.
So I can answer that, Fleur. There wasn't an amendment. We've searched high and low for an amendment, and there wasn't. So we're going from people's recollection of that meeting, and I think it was back at an LTP meeting. So we've brought you that as a result of that request. In terms of consideration of what the steps are, given that we cannot deliver the traffic management or self-deliver the traffic management services, we haven't done any further work on that.
Can I also add, through you, Chair, that if the council were to consider any significant change in the mode of delivery for a service, and I'm talking about major services rather than the multitude of decisions we make internally as an organisation on insourcing or outsourcing, that would require a significant piece of work on the business case for that, and depending on the outcome of that business case, it would probably require a statutory process for consultation. So, for example, when you set up a CCO or a Ccto, there is a statutory process to follow under the Act, and the reversal of these decisions requires the same kind of process. But as I understand it, I am not aware of having been asked to do any such work at present. So we do hope that this briefing at least gives the council context about the environment within which we operate today and what is and isn't possible or appropriate, depending on your measures of appropriateness.
Okay, well, we've gone over time now, and Dan and Bruce, I think I understand where Councillor Fitzsimons is coming from, but what I'm taking from this is actually there's no obvious gap in the way we're delivering services that we should be looking at, but I think there could be some more work done, but we'll leave that for another day. But just want to thank Brad and Siobhan for that, and I guess if there's any follow-up, then anyone can bring it through me and I can pass it through to Siobhan. Okay, have a great afternoon. Cheers.